With the catchphrase, "See Ghibli in a movie theater at least once in your life," 4 Studio Ghibli films have been released in theaters since June 29th. The films being shown are Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, Princess Mononoke, Spirited Away, and Tales from Earthsea. I think it's a really great thing that people can actually watch these films in a movie theater. So I'd like to support the "See Ghibli in a movie theater at least once in your life" campaign. The upgraded video we're going to talk about today is Spirited Away. It's the most highly acclaimed of Hayao Miyazaki's films, and it seems it was also the most requested in a survey about what to show. It earned over 30 billion yen at the box office. It's a box office record that still hasn't been broken, and it's the highest box office record not just for anime, but for any Japanese film. As of 2020, this record has not been broken. It's also the film that the most people say is their favorite among Ghibli films. However, even though so many people have seen it, love it, and everyone knows it, when you ask, "So what is Spirited Away about?" it's hard to give an immediate answer. That's because the story of Spirited Away has a lot of mysteries. For example, what does it mean to be spirited away? And what kind of world did Chihiro and her parents wander into? And what are the true identities of No Face and Haku? These things are made to be only vaguely understood. This time, I'd like to try and examine the film Spirited Away by solving these mysteries one by one. The title is The Ultimate Horror Movie, Spirited Away. This video is an upgraded version of Okada Toshio's seminar number 306, which was broadcast on November 3rd, 2019, and will be rebroadcast now. Now, let's start the video. There are 14 mysteries to unravel in Spirited Away, and the first one is the mystery of the strange world. I'm mainly using my official Blu-ray as a reference, not the DVD. When you start the movie, the Totoro title appears at 0 minutes and 0 seconds. This is shown for 10 seconds, and then it becomes a solid black screen. After 3 seconds of black, a flower and a card appear. It's a flower and a card that says, "Chihiro, let's meet again, Risa." The person looking at this is a somewhat unassuming, or maybe not so unassuming, listless girl with a sloppy posture. From this, we know that this girl is the protagonist, Chihiro. The setting is modern-day Japan. The movie begins with the 10-year-old Chihiro and her parents moving to a new town. What about this location? It's shown, of course, it's Route 201, Nakao. I don't know if Nakao actually exists, but people say it might actually be Kofu. If you turn left on Route 20, you'll go toward Kofu, so this theory is supported by a very detailed investigation on the blog Sudare-san's Room. For example, the first location is also this one, near Route 20, not Route 20, but this house number plate. There's a house that looks like Green Hill on this side, so people think it's around here. However, starting from this film, Ghibli started getting a lot of questions like, what was the model for this? Or what you'd call pilgrimages to sacred places. So they intentionally did a lot of things to make it hard to identify the locations, but Sudai-san has worked hard and identified quite a few of them. For example, when you see Cycle Farm from the top, the left side of the car is the enemy screen. If you see Cycle Farm through the car's pillar, there's a similar place that exists. And then when Tonkatsu Minoya appears in the anime, they found the same place again.
こちらの方にですね、クリーニング店があったら全く同じクリーニング店というふうにですね、かなり
There's a similar dry cleaner, so the locations have been identified quite a bit, and it's probably a reconstruction of various landscapes around Hachioji, but it's very much like a direct copy of a real landscape. This is something Miyazaki later wrote in a book that he came to dislike. He's so selfish. At the time he said, "I want you to copy the real landscape exactly." But later on he said, "I hate that. It's meaningless and no good to do things like that." So the art staff must have been really pushed around.
美術スタッフは本当に振り回されたそうなんですけどもですね。で、千尋のお父さんの運転するアウディはですね、
Chihiro's father, driving an Audi, drives through these places. Yes.
はい、この、土地の木っていうですね。
There's this Tochinoki New Town, I guess. They turn right at the fork in the road, and then the title appears. It looks like this: Spirited Away. This is the father's Audi going up the hill on the right. He actually wanted to go to the new town on this side. Up to this point, it's about 1 minute and 40 seconds. Showing various scenes for 1 minute and 40 seconds and getting to this point shows that Spirited Away is actually a film with a really good pace. Despite the good pace, not much happens for the first 40 minutes. At 1 minute and 53 seconds, the father's car enters a mountain path, passing by an old cedar tree and a fallen torii gate. When the camera pans down from the top and you look at the top, you can see that the trunk of the cedar tree is broken in the middle. The top branches are broken. It's barely alive, with only some leaves remaining. As the camera goes down, the paved road ends, and it becomes a regular mountain path. A leaning torii gate is propped up here. The storyboards also say that this torii is a fallen torii, a broken torii, so it was probably originally placed in the direction they were going, but it has been removed and propped up on the side, which is a rather sacrilegious thing to do. In the past, this mountain path, where the asphalt road ends, was probably what you'd call a divine domain. This giant cedar tree, which was probably the symbol of that domain, and is incredibly old, is now withering and decaying. The clueless family of three, with their father in the Audi, enters this sacred land in four-wheel drive mode. At this point, the father puts the car in neutral and looks around, saying, "Huh, are we going the right way?" Chihiro notices something strange. This is the cedar tree I just talked about. At the base of the propped-up torii gate, there are a lot of small houses made of stone. These small houses are houses for the gods, stone shrines. They have been discarded. A lot of them have been discarded. I want you to pay attention to the messy way they've been placed. There's a zoomed-in photo. When you zoom in, you can see that these stone shrines have clearly been discarded and gathered together. They were probably originally lined up along the approach to the shrine. The things that were lined up and worshipped have been removed and gathered at the base of the cedar tree with the torii gate. Someone, probably a carpenter who worked on the construction, thought, "I'll put them together with the torii gate. This will probably bring a curse, but I'll put them all together so there's no curse." And he gathered them at the base of the old sacred cedar tree along with the torii gate. If you look closely, you can see that some of the stone shrines have broken roofs, but inside, you can see small dishes. These were probably dishes for offering sake, but can you see that one of them is red? There's one that's red, and it gives you a bit of a scary feeling. This red color is made to be very noticeable on the movie screen, a red that makes you jump.
この赤い色がですね、映画の画面ではですね、すごくわかるようにちょっとドキッとするような赤になっています。
Actually, as you might have figured out from what I've said so far, the movie Spirited Away is actually a horror film. It's fundamentally a horror film, and the fantasy elements in the second half are made to be very enjoyable, and it's not clear why Chihiro ends up working in that horror-like environment under the name Sen, but overall, the first 30 minutes of this film are pretty much a horror movie. Until she meets Yubaba, it's a 30-minute horror film, and the depiction of this part of a sacred area where the torii gates have been removed and the houses of the gods have been thrown away, and a family driving into it in their four-wheel drive car without thinking is... Excuse me, my tie was crooked. Is it because I'm talking about a scary story?
この辺りに描写っていうのはハリウッド映画のですね、インディアンの呪われた土地に
This depiction is very similar to how a Hollywood film would show a family moving into a cursed Indian burial ground without knowing anything about it. Chihiro is a transfer student, and she hasn't started school yet. Because she's in a state of limbo before her transfer, she's like the gods without a home. Because the stone shrines have been removed and the gods' homes are gone, they're in a state of limbo, so Chihiro can enter this strange world of the gods' domain. This kind of horror has a classic trope. You can't enter unless you have some kind of connection. In this case, it's not having a home. All three of them are actually in a state of limbo. Her parents are in the middle of moving. I'll explain this next week, but their family is actually in a state of domestic crisis, a family crisis. All three of them are somewhat disconnected, so they can easily enter this world. The parents' family crisis is very difficult to understand, so I'll explain it in detail next week. But since all three of them are in a state of limbo, they mistakenly enter the God's land.
宙ぶらりんの状態なので神様の土地にですね間違えて入ってしまったわけですね。で、ですね。よいしょ。で。
As they drive up the mountain path, can you see this? The road suddenly turns into a stone pavement. It becomes a stone pavement, and the car rattles and shakes. This is a mountain path. The fact that a mountain path suddenly turns into a stone pavement means that it was once a very important road, important enough for people to lay stone pavement in the past. For a road in the mountains to have stone pavement means that it was an extremely sacred path in ancient times, like during the Edo period or even earlier. This is a sign that they've entered a sacred land, but the father doesn't notice and drives at a high speed. The storyboards say that the mother is used to this kind of thing from her engagement days. So the mother looks completely unfazed by the father's reckless driving, but Chihiro is seeing her father like this for the first time, so she's very surprised. A tunnel suddenly appears in front of them. In front of it is a stone statue, Sekijin. It's a humanoid, doll-like figure carved from stone. A Sekijin is a stone statue excavated from ancient burial mounds in northern Kyushu. This tells us that the stone itself is quite old. Thinking, what is this? They look at the red tunnel and see illegible characters written on it. There's a roof and a sign, but they can't read it. Actually, it says oil shop, but the storyboard instructions say, please write it so that it cannot be read. So I wrote it so that it cannot be read. In other words, what lies beyond this point is a theme park centered around a hot spring built before the collapse of the bubble economy. But there's no hot spring water. Since there's no hot spring water, the bathhouse, the aburaya, in this world, heats water in a boiler by burning coal. In other words, it's a fake spa resort. They call it a hot spring resort, even though it doesn't have hot springs. I'll explain this when we get to the town. The sudden stop happens at 3 minutes. It's a speedy development. 3 minutes and 23 seconds. It's only been 3 minutes and 23 seconds since the Totoro mark and the title appeared. The parents enter the tunnel. The father is carefree. He says, it's made of mortar, so it's a pretty new building, as if he has figured out its true nature. The father actually works in construction and knows a lot about buildings. The father is unfazed, but a gust of wind blows into the tunnel from behind. The wind enters the tunnel. Chihiro gets a bad feeling and says, I don't like this. I don't like this place. She really dislikes going inside. I'm not going. This is at 4 minutes and 18 seconds. Chihiro says, I'm not going. But only her father and mother go in. When Chihiro looks at the Sekijin, it's very hard to see, but the camera is moving very, very slowly. You might be able to tell if you look at the edge of the screen. The lens is moving just a little bit more on this side compared to that side. So only the background is flowing outward, but it's hard to notice. This is a very deliberate scene, using a very slow zoom and camera movement to show that Chihiro is captivated by the Sekijin and has a bad feeling.
石人になんか心を奪われて嫌な予感がしてるというですね、すっごい丁寧なシーンです。もう本当に
It's a long cut of about 2 seconds, but you can't really tell what's happening. The original setting for the Sekijin was that it would turn into a frog at night and spit water from its mouth, but that idea was later canceled because they decided it wasn't necessary. However, another Sekijin does start spitting water at night, so you should assume that the reason a river suddenly appeared in the world they entered, making it impossible to cross, is because this guy turned into a frog. So they go in, despite the bad feeling, and this is the first scene where the father and mother enter the tunnel. The surroundings are red and painted with mortar. This is the end. It's almost the final scene. This is where they are returning from this world, but while it's the same tunnel, the Sekijin is now just a stone car stopper, with stones piled up and the surroundings filled with trees. In other words, the tunnels at the beginning and the end of the film are different. So at this point, they've already been bewitched, or rather, they've already entered a strange world. It's not that they enter a strange world after passing through the tunnel. The tunnel itself was already part of the strange world. So where did this strange world begin? It was probably from the point where they passed the stone shrines. That's when they entered the world of the gods. At 5 minutes and 53 seconds after they pass through the tunnel, a plain stretches out and a long uphill slope continues, which later turns into something like a sea. There's no one in this wide open plain. At 6 minutes and 50 seconds, Chihiro says to her mother, "I'm scared, Mom. Mom, I don't want to go." But her mother only says, "Hurry up." And for some reason, she doesn't make eye contact with Chihiro even once. The father and mother are quite affectionate with each other. The mother stumbles and the father supports her, and they laugh together. But to Chihiro, she just says, "Hurry up." This abnormal coldness from the parents, especially the mother, has a reason, but I'll explain that in the second half next week. This part is quite deep, and even people who have seen the movie say, the parents are like children. They're still in love, and that's why they're so cold. But Miyazaki would never do something so meaningless.
I'll explain it in the second half next week.
From 5 minutes and 53 seconds, they pass through the tunnel, and at 7 minutes and 38 seconds, a strange sight spreads out before them. It's fast, isn't it? Getting to this point in 7 minutes and 38 seconds is a pretty good pace, even for a Hollywood film. The camera descends from the creepy eye-shaped sign at the top, and Chihiro follows her father and mother up the stairs.
お父さん、お母さん、続いて千春がですね、千里が、千と千尋だ、千尋がですね、階段を登っていきます。もうね、本当に間違えちゃうですね。
An unmanned amusement town stretches out. In other words, a theme park like this, which is in the middle of a divine world and a real world, has been built where the gods live.
習慣なんですけども、こういうですね、テーマパークみたいなものをですね、神様が住んでい
In
る
a
ところに
place that was originally the sacred land of the gods, during the time of the bubble economy, before it collapsed, when Japan was rich, they built a lot of strange buildings like this. And then ghosts came to live there.
Chihiro's father says it's a relic of the bubble era, but these kinds of huge theme parks have actually existed all over Japan since the Meiji period.
For example, in Asakusa, Tokyo, there was the Fujisan Yonkaku, which was modeled after Mount Fuji. What was this? It was like a brochure from that time, but in 1887 they built a real Mount Fuji set in Asakusa Rock. It was 32 meters high, so it was a pretty tall building that you could climb.
There's a photo of it.
The photos that remain are a bit grainy. There are people on bicycles and other people in the foreground, but this is what was called the Asakusa Fuji. People could actually walk around and climb to the top. It was 32 stories high, so it was a very tall building. It was demolished in 1890 and later became a building called the Ryunkaku. It's what's known as the Asakusa 12-story building. It was like a vertical leaning tower of Pisa. It was in Asakusa, and they built things like this. Woodblock prints from that time also remain. Buildings like this were built in Asakusa, and it seems there were many of them. During the bubble eras of the Meiji and Taisho periods, there were many famous ones, such as Keio Kaku Amusement Park, Kagetsuen Amusement Park, and Togetsuen. Also, Okuyama Landscape in Asakusa was called a department store of new shrines and temples, and people said you could go there to pray to all kinds of gods and Buddhas. In novels, Itogawa Rampo wrote Strange Tale of Panorama Island and Ghost Island. These are all pretty similar. During the late Meiji and Taisho periods, when Japan had a kind of bubble economy, it was a common theme in stories written by authors like Edogawa Ranpo that people would build audacious theme parks that even the gods would shrink from, and strange things would happen there. If you want to know more about this, I'll talk about it with some materials after class today. So what I'm trying to say is that Spirited Away is actually set in an abandoned theme park that has become haunted by ghosts. At the 9-minute mark, the parents find some delicious-looking food and start eating it frantically. Chihiro, getting a bad feeling, doesn't eat and leaves her parents to explore the town. As she wanders through the town, an unmanned shopping district stretches on forever, and these lanterns will look nice later on. It's a good touch that Chihiro is standing on the edge of the screen.
Pay attention to the position of the shadow.
The buildings are like this, and the sun is coming from almost directly above, or slightly tilted, and this becomes a foreshadowing for the scary things that will happen later. There's no wasted effort. When showing an unmanned shopping district like this, they deliberately place the protagonist on the far left, and the shadow is cast on the opposite side, making it look bright, but also showing that nothing scary has happened yet, but something scary is about to happen on the other side of the screen. From this point on, the story becomes scary. As she goes up the stairs, she arrives at a strange building. There is a magnificent pine tree, a stone lantern, and beyond that, a red-railed Taikobashi bridge. Beyond the red-railed Taikobashi bridge, you can see a huge bathhouse called Aburaya. The Taikobashi Bridge probably has a practical purpose, but more than that, it's a gateway to another world. It's a part of what's called the Senin Shiso philosophy. In China, a bridge to where the immortals live is always a Taikobashi bridge with a high arch in the middle. So when wealthy people in Japan used to build Japanese gardens, they were actually building the land of the immortals, where the Chinese immortals live. That's why when they place miniatures of bridges, they always use these arched Taikobashi bridges. And there's a huge one, and beyond it, there's a gorgeous building. At 11 minutes and 15 seconds, Chihiro crosses this Taikobashi bridge, but she shouldn't. Beyond that point is the land of the gods. As she crosses the Taikobashi bridge and is about to go to the front of the bathhouse, a boy in white casual clothes, Haku, appears and says, "Go back. You shouldn't go any further." This is Haku, and he says, "Go back. You shouldn't go." He says it while approaching the front of the screen, and the shadow behind Haku starts to lengthen rapidly. Because the sun is setting so fast, the shadow of the bridge behind him lengthens dramatically as he talks in a hurry. As he talks in a hurry, his profile gets redder and redder as the sunset approaches, and the shadow gets longer and longer sideways. So it's a vampire horror movie? This is a really scary expression. In this world of the gods, the world of the immortals, where the Aburaya exists, time flows at this speed. From this point, we know that time here is roughly 10 times faster than in the real world. I'll explain why it's 10 times faster later. For Chihiro, Spirited Away is a story of 4 days. It's a story of just 3 nights and 4 days, but in the real world, about a month has passed during that time, maybe more than a month. This 10 times faster time is also an important point that will be part of the theme I'll explain in the second half next week, so don't forget it. Anyway, time starts to flow in a matter of minutes. In the empty town from before, red lights are lit one after another, and black shadows grow from the ground. Chihiro panics and says, "Dad, Mom," and tries to run away and go back, but her parents have already turned into pigs as punishment for eating the gods' offerings. Furthermore, in the darkened town, black, ghost-like figures appear. This part is thrilling, isn't it? In the town that was empty just a moment ago, black shadows suddenly appear from the ground, and those black shadows start moving around the anxious Chihiro. Chihiro tries to leave her parents and run away, and as she goes down the first set of stairs, black shadows start walking up from there as well. Well, it's turning into a horror movie. However, she notices that the stairs she came up are now water. The tunnel she just came through is now far away, and she can see the lights of the town beyond it, but the area in between has become a river or even a sea, and she can no longer cross. She can't go home. This is a very desperate but beautiful scene.
Miyazaki doesn't just show this situation. When Chihiro says, "This is a lie, disappear, disappear, disappear," her body starts to become transparent.
Her body becomes transparent, and a magnificent fairy appears beyond it, and monster-like things start coming ashore, and she sees this scene through her transparent hand. In other words, Chihiro is staring at her hand in fear, thinking, "My body is transparent now, and I'm disappearing." And then a glowing boat appears beyond it, showing two situations, what is happening now, and the change happening to Chihiro's body simultaneously in one frame. It's a ridiculously skillful cut. It's not just a descriptive, possible to be just a shot kind of cut. It's filled with suspense and the next development. The storyboards around here are truly a work of a master.
When this boat reaches the shore, gods come out of it.
The gods came out of it. Japanese gods, in particular, are invisible. They don't have a form. I think I've explained this before, but the reason the Namahage and Akita wear masks and straw capes is that gods are originally invisible beings, so they cover them with a straw cape and wear a mask to make them gods. This is similar to what's believed in New Guinea and other places, so-called spirits.
That's why the English title of Spirited Away is Spirited Away.
The use of the word spirit means that it's closer to a spirit than a god. They don't have a form and only have masks, but when they come ashore where Chihiro is, their bodies start to materialize, and the forms of the gods, who should originally be invisible, become visible. This world is a place in between the world of the gods and the real world where humans live. The ghosts keep coming ashore, but Chihiro doesn't know they are gods yet. She thinks they are ghosts. Chihiro is frozen in fear and can't move. Then Haku, the handsome boy from before, comes and makes her eat something from the... He says that if she doesn't eat something from this world, she'll disappear. And her body, which was becoming transparent, finally returns to normal. He takes Chihiro to the boiler room next to the Aburaya and tells her to meet Kamaji and ask him for a job. The reason is that if she doesn't work, she'll be turned into an animal by Yubaba, the witch who rules the bathhouse. This is at the 16-minute mark. For these 16 minutes, the film is incredibly dense, and the depiction is pure horror. It's horror, but it's made as a horror film that kids can just barely watch. But within that horror, all the scenes you want in a horror film are there. For example, the parents do something they shouldn't, and even though you try your best to stop them, they don't listen. Or you get a bad feeling, but you still go in. And like a vampire film, the sun, which wasn't tilted much before, sinks into a sunset at an unbelievable speed, and the town becomes dark, and strange things appear. This incredibly interesting horror film development is condensed into just 16 minutes. I really think this is one of the most interesting horror films in the world, but Spirited Away isn't really evaluated as a horror film. The first of the 14 mysteries of Spirited Away, The Mystery of the Strange World, is what this strange world was. It's actually a theme park that was built on an ancient sacred place during the bubble era, and when arrogant people built a theme park, that theme park was later abandoned, so the entire theme park became a haunted house. That's what this strange world is.
In other words, it's The Shining. It's a haunted house story like The Shining, but on a huge scale. People who watch it don't realize it's a haunted house story.
They think of it as a mysterious fantasy world. But the fun of the opening is that it's actually a horror movie, a haunted house story like The Shining. But in the middle, it turns into a strange development where you become one of the ghosts and work with them. It's a story about a girl who gets into that world and can't escape. Her parents have turned into pigs, and her body is disappearing? So what should she do?
This film, which started as an incredible horror film, turns into a somewhat interesting fantasy film from this point on.
This change from a horror film entering the real world to a fantasy world actually has a source. Let's talk about the source in the next segment. Well, I don't even have time to read comments. It's already 35 minutes, isn't it?
The next segment is still in the free section.
Today is tough, so let me get a drink of water. Oh no, oh no.
This is tough.
The free section continues.
Well, it's not really okay. I really want to stop at 30 minutes.
After the mystery of the strange world, next is the mystery of Yubaba. I really wanted to talk about Yubaba in this free section. I'm just so disappointed that Yubaba is misunderstood by the public. Audiences, customers, basically judge a person by their lines. They think of a person as good or bad based on their lines. So they immediately think Yubaba is cruel and brutal. And they immediately think, oh, Zeniba's a good person. If you only look at their lines, it seems like Yubaba is cruel and Zeniba is a good person.
When Chihiro says, "Thank you, Grandma," and hugs her, people assume she's a good person. But that's not true.
I'll talk about how Zeniba is 100 times scarier next week.
That will be in the second half. Yubaba's true identity. Yubaba is a witch.
In other words, she was originally human. She has a big face and can transform into a bird, but that's magic. She has many subordinates, like frogs and slug-like women, working for her at a bathhouse called Aburaya. Aburaya is actually said to be a, quote, a company with a good reputation. End quote. Even on Twitter, people say, she gives a job to anyone with the desire to work, doesn't discriminate against newcomers, praises them for their achievements, and as a boss, she personally drives away unreasonable customers. She's a witch with wonderful talent as a manager.
The part about her personally driving away unreasonable customers, this is written in the storyboards as Dragon Ball.
It's a scene where she shoots a Kamehameha at No-Face, which is a bit of a playful moment in Spirited Away.
Yubaba actually has quite a few gag scenes like this.
After Yubaba shoots the Kamehameha, it has no effect, and No-Face throws mud on her, and she gets covered in mud. It's a gag scene.
But the audience doesn't really laugh.
That's because it's made as a horror film, and she's seen as a scary person, so it's not funny. Isao Takahata said something like, compared to the castle of Cagliostro, there's a lot of movement in Spirited Away, but not a single person in the audience laughed. And he was being very sarcastic towards Miyazaki. She does a lot of gags. She originally said unforgivable, big customer, but later says unforgivable, customer, which I think is a pretty good line. In addition, on Twitter, people also say the live-in environment is fully equipped, uniforms and changes of clothes are provided, meals are included, there are allowances for justified absences, and starting and ending work is just a matter of flipping a sign. There's no rule like a time card that says you must be here X minutes before work starts. thoughts and actions based on the employee's resourcefulness are approved. It's written as a company with a good reputation.
What's interesting is that it was cut for time, but there's a pretty long line in a scene where Kamaji and Chihiro cut the Engacho sign. This line was cut from the main film.
Kamaji says, "This seal is terrible. A seal of the witch's slave." Then Chihiro says, "I thought I was a slave too. I thought everyone was doing slave labor." And Kamaji says, "We're full-fledged workers. We chose to work here on our own. We're free to come and go from the bathhouse. We just keep our real names a secret from the witch."
In other words, it's a free contract.
It's a shame this line was cut, but Yubaba isn't really a dictator. She hires everyone on a free contract. These are Yubaba's virtues, her pride, what she believes she must be. However, Yubaba also has a flaw. She falls in love with people too easily. The truth is, Yubaba is too emotional and loves people too much, so she can't let go of the ones she loves. For example, it's easy to see this with the giant baby Bo. It's clear that she dotes on him, but she also really likes Haku and Chihiro. She says pretty cruel things in her lines, but she likes them. So, for example, when she finds out that Chihiro is going to see Zeniba at the end, she gets really angry. She says, "What?" and gets angry, saying, "Have someone eat Chihiro's parents, who turned into pigs." It's basically because her love is too deep. If someone she likes leaves her, she becomes very unforgiving.
At the same time, when Haku gets injured, she says, "He's useless now. Throw him away." Because she likes them for a reason, like because he's useful or because he did something good for me. And there are reasons why she likes it, but she really likes it because it's useful or because it's good for her.
But if that person becomes useless or leaves her, she becomes extremely hateful or extremely dismissive of them. Yubaba is a person with a very strong human element like that.
She has an ugly face, but you can't hate her.
So, what were the frogs and women working at the Aburaya originally?
One setting is that they were originally frogs and slugs who became human, and another setting is that they were all human and would turn into frogs or slugs if they became unable to work for Yubaba. The settings are contradictory. Miyazaki himself gives different answers every time he's asked by an animator. This setting is not officially unified. One thing we can say is that she uses frogs and slugs. In ancient Japan, frogs and slugs were grouped under one name. In the traditional Japanese natural history known as Honzogaku, which means study of grass and books, in Honzogaku, living things are divided into humans, beasts, birds, and fish. Everything that is not human, beast, bird, or fish is called mushi, insect.
Even snakes are mushi, actually. The reason there's a snake called mamushi is because snakes are classified as mushi.
Lizards, spiders, all small animals other than insects are in the mushi category.
So, what is Yubaba? She's a person who loves mushi. She's a princess who loves mushi.
In other words, she's now